Warning: the following podcast might be too truthful for most liberals. Listener discretion is therefore advised.
Welcome to the Tea Party Power Hour. This is your host, Mark Galar. We have a very special guest today, Mr. Ed Martin. Ed is a J6 attorney representing many of the people who were caught up in the J6 dragnet, if you will. And he is here today to talk to us and help us make sense out of Statute 1512C2, which is actually coming up before the Supreme Court rather soon. Is that correct, Ed?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, they accepted what's called certiorari about 10 days ago now. In fact, the brief is due in a couple days from the government, and then it'll be up. The court will probably hear this argument in late March or early April.
Okay. Now, for those who don't know, the Statute 1512C2 is part of the overall Sarbanes-Oxley Act, but when you go back and look at that particular act, it doesn't imply that it would be used in this particular manner, does it?
No, this is really I'd have to tell you, it's kind of a major scandal, I think, in the history of American law. And 1512, this provision was passed after the Enron scandal. And what they were addressing was a problem where there had been evidence tampering. And so it's actually housed in the criminal code for witness tampering and tampering with evidence. And it was about the integrity of evidence. And it was called obstruction of official proceeding because it was basically saying it was before an official trial was ongoing, or even that there had been notice of an investigation, that people knew something was coming, and therefore they started to mess with evidence. It was never used for conduct like standing up at a hearing and disrupting an official proceeding like they did when Justice Kavanaugh had his hearings interrupted by leftists. They didn't use it in any way like this ever until January 6th. And now with January 6th, they've used it in a way that is so broad, it's basically any speech that you say that they don't like, they'll call that obstruction of official proceeding. And the real problem with this is it's not a minor charge. It's a felony charge of 20 years in prison. So a lot of the J6ers got misdemeanor trespass, misdemeanor vandalism, and then they got this felony. And in the juries in D.C., you had no chance to survive the felony. And a lot of the real sadness here is that some of the guys pled guilty to these felony charges because they didn't want to risk 20 years. And the government kept saying, we won't plead. We won't get rid of anything else. We'll get rid of anything else except the obstruction of official proceeding. So you're facing 20 years. And they say, we'll recommend 5 years in prison. So basically you get 5 years in prison for an advocacy crime. And that's really completely true. And when you pull back on it, you realize they were really doing this because they were angling for Trump. And they're really doing this because they're angling for their political enemies. Because anytime, if it's as broad as they have used it, anytime you get up at a school board meeting, anytime you get up at a state legislature, you could be charged with obstruction of official proceeding and 20 years in jail. And so thankfully, the Supreme Court took the case. They will be looking at this in two different ways, and I'm confident that they're going to say that's not what the law was meant to do. That's not what it says. We're not going to allow this to go forward.
When it comes to going after Trump or people who support Trump, it seems like there's some rather creative things being done with the law. I mean, they dug in their bag of tricks and pulled out FARA, which really hadn't been used to go after Trump supporters. We see it with Alvin Bragg using statutes 175.05 and 175.10.
Yep.
Absolutely never meant to be used in that way. And then now we see it with statute 1512C2. I think I heard you say in another interview that it's almost like they're daring us to stop them. I mean, it's sort of
that's partly right. But let me pause and say what you just described. I'm a lawyer. I went to law school. I mean, my dad's a lawyer in a small town, and I grew up, and there was a sense that you're kind of called to the bar. You're called to something in a special way, especially in America, because America, we don't have princes. There's no King Charles in America, right? We have, and one of the groups of people that are esteemed are the custodians of our crown jewel, the Constitution. And so what you just described are lots of lawyers who are basically saying, show me the man and I'll come up with the crime. And that's exactly what the Soviets did. And here's the thing that's troubling, and I will answer your question, but where are the rest of the lawyers? There should be lawyers that are saying, hey, I'm a liberal. I disagree with Trump's policies on X, but this is not how the system's supposed to work. If this is the system, if it's going to work like this, we're not America. Our crown jewel is the Constitution, the rule of law, and the founding values. So it is, as you point out, and you made that quick list, it is, they have stretched the law to target the guy. And then now, just as a footnote, the collateral damage to thousands of Americans who were there on January 6th, it's insane. I mean, I would say conservatively, you're talking about 100,000 people whose lives have been generously, I'd say, turned upside down. If I was being more honest with you, I'd say destroyed, because your life's not going to be the same if dad is in jail for 3, 4, 5 years. And by the way, almost all the J6ers that are arrested and targeted and in jail are working people. If you have money, you kind of buy your way out of it. I don't mean to be too cynical. I know I sound like maybe I sound like an old ACLU lawyer about 50 years ago, but you could buy your way. The people that are stuck in jail are folks that their wives are working 2 jobs to pay the rent. They're not paying the mortgage on a ski house, in Utah. And so we're watching this happen to thousands and thousands of people, and it's extraordinary. And by the way, one more footnote. Sorry, they didn't charge Trump with it. They didn't charge Trump with insurrection. They didn't charge Trump with sedition. They didn't charge any of the guys. There was like 1 or 2 they tried in January 6th, and they backed off of it. They basically said vandalism, trespass, and then this made-up, nonsensical BS 1512 as a hammer to destroy people. That's what they've been doing.
Well, let me say this very quickly about the families that have been disrupted. I don't always bring up previous guests when I'm doing an interview, but I don't know if you're familiar with Cynthia Hughes. She has a group called the Patriot Freedom Project, and they are trying to...
I'm actually, I should have done it. I'm on the board with her. Cynthia, about 2.5 years ago, when she just started, she asked me to go on the board, and so I do. Their Patriot Freedom Project is, as you point out, a wonderful group. We raised about $2.5 million. We have spent a chunk of it, a big chunk of it, on legal, paying for lawyers. But we've spent as much on the families. And this Christmas, Cynthia's been on the phone like every day, just trying to get families to be able to, get them a Christmas dinner and all. So if you go to patriotfreedomproject.com and you want to know your money goes where it needs to go, that's a really good group. And it's a 501c3, so tax deductible and all that. But I also can tell you, I don't go. People ask me to be on boards of all kinds of things, and I always say no. And I couldn't say no to this one.
I knew that she had an attorney working with her, and I guess my memory was not working. I honestly did not know that was you.
That's funny. Yeah, that's right.
When I brought this up, but you can tell Cynthia I'm still plugging for her. Okay.
Thank you. I will. Thank you.
And this is a great cause, because as Cynthia pointed out when she was on the show, and I'm sure this is true of so many of your clients, said, when the breadwinner is in prison and mom's having to work 2 jobs and there may not be Christmas presents and it's hard paying for the rent, it's hard paying the car payment, these people need help. And their one real sin, if we're going to be honest, is they supported Donald Trump. And that's their, as Trump likes to say, they're not coming after me, they're coming after you. And they really are. I mean, it's embarrassing how blatant they are as far as saying we will twist and stretch the law any way we have to get at these Trump people. But let's back up just a little bit. Those people were there on January 6th protesting what they believe to be a less than honest election, a less than fair election. Based on what you know about the 2020 election, do you think they had a legitimate business to be there? I know they have First Amendment rights.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's two questions there, right? One is, as you point out, it's a constitutional right to be wrong. If you can have a crazy idea and you can be wrong, and that's not unlawful. So that's one thing. We used to have that in America. But the second question, as you point out, is what did people believe? And people believed, and I think it was a fair belief. They believed something didn't work right in that election. They had seen the COVID lies. They had seen the ongoing shifting government relationship to the people. We'd had the FISA warrants. We've had the media cover Trump, the Russia investigation. We had lots of things that made people distrust what was going on. It was a reasonable thing. Now, let me just say to you, I ran the election board in St. Louis, Missouri, where I'm from, in 05 and 06. I ran the elections there. I was later chief of staff to the governor of Missouri, which means we picked the election officials. I was heavily involved in elections. I can tell you the 2020 election, there were major problems with the election, not that different than other times, but they were accelerated and they were on steroids in the sense that the Democrats had hired more lawyers, engaged in more lawsuits in places where it mattered. 90% of the country did not see anything different. You might have seen something dumb in your ballot box. They might have, but 90% of the country is in places where they were going to go the way they were going to go. But in the 10% where it mattered, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Wisconsin, there was major problems. I mean, really significant problems. Have I seen the proof that it was all stolen? I haven't seen it yet. Have I seen evidence that makes me doubt whether the thing was on the up and up? Heck, within 2 or 3 months of the election, Democrats did a major interview for one of these Newsweek, I think it was. And Molly Ball said they admitted that they schemed and planned for years to fortify the election. Now, I have a hard time. I know politicians, both parties, and I have a hard time believing that they stopped at the line of no law breaking this time. I mean, I'm not saying everybody broke the law, but when there's lots of money, lots of power, lots of things at stake, and they admit, we fortified the election, but we never broke the law. It's not really believable. So I was there on January 6th. I was at the Ellipse speech. I was there on December 12th. I was there, which was another 6 weeks before, but another protest. I was at another protest in Washington a few weeks before that. I was at all those things, and I can tell you, people had a reasonable concern that was being raised, and they were doing it in the way that they should have been able to do it. And the fact that they were targeted is pure political persecution. It's not, as you say, it's about Trump, and it's not about the law. It's just simply not. And I've seen these things, and I know I'm ranting a little bit, but let me pause and say this. They also used 1512 to make these men, mostly men, sound like terrorists. So again, if you break a window, if you and I go to a college bowl game and we act like idiots, we break a window and we trespass, we're going to go before a judge. He's going to say, you guys are idiots, pay for everything, fix it. You're not going to go to jail. We're going to send you home, but you're on probation. And that's that. That's the kind of conduct that happened, except they use this 1512 to then say these people are violent felons. Felon. It's a felony. That when they said we're going to charge them with these 5 things, that's up to 25 years in prison. It sounded scary. And the judges in D.C. went for this narrative that these are Osama bin Laden-like guys. My clients in D.C., in the courts there, in the federal courts, we had protective orders that limited our speech, the lawyers, as to looking at the video, looking at evidence that was like what happened when Osama bin Laden was charged and his co-conspirators in 9/11. And you say to yourself, can they be serious? They used they used their power and this law to frame the thing up as a real terroristic threat. And the last thing I'll say is there's never been in the history of America, I'll stand by this forever, there's never been misconduct like that special select committee, Liz Cheney and Pelosi, Benny Thompson did. They spent $20 million. They destroyed all the evidence that they found before they left. They wrote a report that lied, and they brainwashed half the country to believe that these poor men and women of January 6th were really terrorists. It's one of the greatest betrayals of the citizens that we've ever seen. And if I live a full life, I will not stop trying to hold them accountable for what they did. The people, Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson and Adam Kinzinger and Nancy Pelosi, the way they lied about we the people, it echoes through the life of this country. It's one of the worst betrayals we've ever had. They got nothing. The worst traitors to the country couldn't do what they did in terms of the duplicity and the amount of money. And, in Colorado, the Colorado Supreme Court struck Trump from the ballot, in large part because they said, yes, we're relying on a government report, and the government report has credibility. In what world, Colorado Supreme Court, do you think that has credibility? Maybe in the past it did, maybe it shouldn't have had, But I tell you right now, I tell people all the time, switch your model. Reagan said trust, then verify. And our motto right now in this country when it comes to our government is distrust and then verify. Do not take anything you're told as truth, because their record now is so blatantly lying. And again, that people like Mitt Romney and others, and even the people in Congress now, the conservatives, that they're not up in arms over that January 6th Select Committee shows that they're just feckless and foolish, or just weak, one of the three. So it's I'm sorry for the rant, but it gets my blood boiling.
It just shows your passion and that your statements are very genuine. So feel free to rant all you want, frankly. we like that here. But let's go back to this J6 committee. I mean, they were even caught altering videos and putting sound effects into videos. I mean, they were basically lying, and they know it. And I think the reason half the country believes it is because half the country wants to believe it. And the mainstream media was on the side of the committee. And there are people in this country who actually believe that all Trump supporters are racist and that all Trump supporters are Nazis. I mean, they're the ones supporting Hamas right now. They're the ones that don't like the Israelis, but apparently we're the Hitler-esque Nazis.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Well, I mean, but just to put some flesh on those bones of what you're saying, I agree. They spent $19 million. They hired hundreds and hundreds of law professors from Georgetown Law and all the law firms, all the liberals. They spread all the money around, making sure that people were being funded to do all this work. They put out a report, and the report does not mention the pipe bomber until page 208 of a 250-page report. Now, I have to tell you, I test this all the time. If you go anywhere in the world and you say the two major political parties in Germany, someone planted a pipe bomb on the front steps of each of the two major political parties, that would be the biggest story for years, right? If you go to Poland, if you go to Russia and you say pipe bombs, we had two pipe bombs planted on January 5th. I've looked at the video. I can see the pipe bomber. I can see when they move here, there, the pipe bomb, they go here, they go get another pipe bomb, they put it in. And the FBI, which can find, if you and I, download the wrong piece of whatever, they'll find it on us, and we can't find the pipe bomber. And back to the Liz Cheney Select Committee, they spent all this time, as you point out. They take hundreds and hundreds of video depositions. They force MAGA people to get lawyers, and lawyers are about $10,000 a pop to be able to get through this process. So you're and you don't get any government money for it. You're not getting anybody paying you to do it. So you got over 1,000 people do depositions, video depositions. Then they delete the videos. They get rid of the videos and they cherry pick them. Before they get rid of them, they hire an ABC television producer to make made-for-TV hearings where they use the clips of these people, and they have snippets of someone says, and then Trump said, when we how could I lose to this guy? And they cut that and they say, see, he admitted he lost, when all he was saying was he didn't believe he lost anyway. But my point is, they did all that and they spent millions, over $19 million. They put out the report in a hurry. They got rid of all the documents. And as you point out, the big government, Congress, this committee, and big tech and big media, they work together, and they work together to give us a narrative. I call them the narrative machine. And the narrative was insurrectionist, really bad people, et cetera, et cetera. It's the biggest, it's such a betrayal. And that people are not embarrassed is one of the greatest indications of how deeply corrupt the system is, because people will go right now. If you go to LinkedIn, you could do a search. You'll find hundreds of people who have on their LinkedIn accounts their service to the Select Committee, bragging about it, going to conferences and talking about how they went through this and they went through that and they found this and they found that. So it was an extraordinary brainwashing. As you point out, there's a lot of people that fall for it. But I'd be a little more generous. I would say this. A lot of us are going to be persuaded by powerful brainwashing techniques, especially the likes of which is used against us by our own government. That's the facts. And so I actually feel sorry for a lot of people when they come at me and they say, oh, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And I say, I'm sorry that your news sources did this to you. I'm sorry that your team did this to you. It's a great, it's a travesty. But that doesn't change the fact that the country has about 30 to 40% of people that still think it was still think it was an insurrection. It's incredible. So we got a lot of work to do. to figure out how to get off of this. But it's becoming clearer what happened every day.
When you say it's become clearer what happened, one of the things that's bothering me is the omission, let's call it that, the omission of prosecution against people who were clearly trying to instigate a riot. You know where I'm going with this, right? To Ray Epps.
Right.
And
Sure.
when you look at the video of him, he's encouraging people to go into the Capitol. There were people who walked through doors being held open by Capitol Police, walked inside,
Right.
stayed within the velvet ropes, you know this, and
Yep.
they're being prosecuted. Meanwhile, you've got video of Ray Epps telling everybody you need to go inside the Capitol, and nothing happens to this guy. They said even while he was doing that, I just watched the documentary from the Epic Times, and they said even while he was doing this, people around him were screaming, "Fed, Fed, Fed," because it was so obvious that he was a setup.
Well,
so what's going on with this?
Right.
How much of this was
I mean,
this
is all it was. Look, there's a various ways to see this, and it's important to understand it because it's probably a combination of all of the ways I'm going to say you can view it. But let me first, kind of brag on my credentials. I mentioned I was chief of staff to the governor of Missouri for a couple of years back in the 2000s. And when a big event happened in your state, in my state, Missouri, or any state, you get a briefing from law enforcement. You know, at the time, they had just started one of these fusion centers, which we came to really worry about, and we still should. But at the time, there was this intelligence center that would tell us, hey, you know, there's going to be a 4th of July celebration at the Arch in St. Louis. We expect 500,000 people. We do know that there are some people that are doing this and this and this. Here's what we're doing. Or a better example, I wasn't chief of staff then, but I was the chairman of the Republican Party, so I had some relationship to some of the powers that be. When Ferguson happened and they were rioting in Ferguson and burning Ferguson to the ground, the St. Louis PD had informants and actually undercover officers inside the protesters. That's how we knew what was coming next, and they were just basically trying to control it. I mean, they weren't able to shut it down. Lots of. My point is, when there's a major event, there's no doubt that there are vested interests that are paying attention to what's coming, and that has to be the case on January 6th, because after December 12th, which was the last rally before the holidays, and January 6th was sort of called. It was initially supposed to be 3 or 4 groups having this rally, and then Trump said, I'll give a speech. That caused a focus, and everybody knew there was going to be 500,000, 1 million people. So they had to know, and it would be law enforcement malpractice not to have placed people inside the whole thing. So here's my categories. 1, how many law enforcement were being run either as informants or plain clothes, like they did in Michigan in the hoax, kidnapping, hoax up there, because they've admitted that now. And so you can see that. How many? Has to be some. Don't lie to me and say there's none. Just tell me if it's 20 or 200. All right, so that's one category. Second, just from the standpoint of crowd control, you would be interested and you would have to have people in position on that day. They have to have done that. And they did. We see it now. So and then I'm going to talk about plain clothes. We would know that, right? The third category is the actual presence of the law enforcement. Tons of questions. Why did they not bring in a lot of the folks that were offered to them just as show of force? A lot of the ways you get people to behave is you got a bunch of big guys in blue and they steer them, right? So that's one. And the last category I'd say is what's going on with these sort of operations like the pipe bomber, some of these things that you're seeing, kind of buses coming here and there. And so the overarching sense I have is, 1, I think there was some basic incompetence. They didn't know how to do it. The Capitol Police didn't know how to handle a big crowd. But that's not, to me, the number one. The number 2 and 3 is who was in on creating this environment to have this happen, and maybe the most important category, who was doing it, right? Now, look, in August of 2020, there was a group, again, same people overlapping with the Select Committee. It was a special project that was funded millions of dollars, funded private donations, but a nonprofit run by a Georgetown law professor, and it was called the Transition Integrity Project. And you might remember they game planned. They had tabletop games of what would happen if the election went this way, that way, or the other way. They put out a report. I think it's about 40 pages. and they described the conduct that happened on January 6th, including the provocateurs, including, having these things happen. They were planning on one of these scenarios and taking part of it. And so the final thing I'd say is the group that's been doing this in the world for 50 years, probably accelerated in the last 40, but 50 or so years, is the American CIA. These color revolutions where they stand up groups and cause this chaos and then manipulate the media and the messaging to make it look like what they wanted to get political control. That's, again, a fact. And that's when you take all those pieces that I just said, put it together, you say, that looks like what they were doing. And don't tell me to trust you. I distrust you. Prove me wrong.
I'm going to ask you for a couple of predictions. One, I'd like to ask you for a prediction as to what's going to happen with the Supreme Court on 1512C2. I think I know your opinion based on what you've said so far. And then I'd like you to weigh in on all of these other coordinated legal attacks on Trump. Is he going to make it to 2024's election without going to jail?
So one thing I can tell you for sure, take this to the bank. I would gentlemen wager on this. There won't be any Trump D.C. trial because of the 1512 going to the Supreme Court, as well as the presidential immunity. It's just not going to happen. That even these thugs and weasels that are doing this can't figure out a way to get. They're not going to have a decision on the 1512 until June. They'll argue the case in late March, early April. They'll decide it in the last week of June. I'm confident that the court majority will strike it down, and they will say, but they'll do it like the court does. I don't think they're going to come in and say, aha, this is dramatically, everybody that ever touched this is out. It was way down. I think what they'll say, there are two questions before it. One of them is about whether it's clear that it was meant to be evidence tampering. Could it be used for advocacy and all these other things? I think they're going to say it's not clear enough, which will knock out a lot of it. The second one is about corruptly. They use the word corruptly. And corruptly in the law means someone was supposed to get a benefit out of it. And there's no way that you can see that the J6 protesters are getting a benefit out of it. And I think that corruptly will be another aspect that the court will use to say, yeah, this is overcharged. So that's number one, I think. And that will mean that, it doesn't work for Trump. It'll mean that a bunch of J6 folks will get a better deal in terms of their trials. Some that are in jail for that charge will get their sentence reduced. It'll be a big deal. I mean, it will be a major deal. As to the attacks on Trump, will he go to jail? They're certainly going to try. But I would just step back a little broader and just say this. This systematic lawfare against the president and against lawyers that are supposed to help him. John Eastman is on trial for his law license in California. Jeff Clark is on trial for his law license in D.C., Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, all these people. I mean, basically, they're trying to make it so the legal system is inaccessible if you're not on the right side of the aisle politically. And that's a due process. That's at the heart of due process, is having a right to counsel and a right to an impartial tribunal. So it's unprecedented, this lawfare assault. And my prediction on it will be, look, Georgia is a joke. New York is a joke. Doesn't mean it's not going to be a pain. Doesn't mean it's not going to be nasty, but those are silly state court, really marginal people. The Mar-a-Lago case is silly. The document case is a really silly case. There's nothing there. The one that's the big one is D.C. And so I worry about it. You go to federal court in Washington, D.C., and anywhere, but in D.C. with the bad juries that they have, you have to worry about it. It can't be too glib. But ultimately, I don't see that his conduct, everything they're charging him with is mind reading. They have to read his mind and say, Donald Trump really knew he lost, and he just did this to grab power, when all the evidence is that he still believes that he won, and he's just trying to get to the bottom of it. So I think ultimately the election is going to settle most or all of this. And for people that think that he can't pardon himself, maybe that's right. I think he can myself. Pardon power is plenary. But I do know that the Department of Justice under Trump would have a different attorney general. And I think a lot of the cases, including his own, would get a different look. And so, but last thing on this, part of what they like, and when I say they, I mean all these people that are willing to promote this lawfare and this lack of due process, they like to destabilize. Again, it's what the CIA has done for 40 or 50 years, destabilizing institutions. And putting the Supreme Court into the middle of this in the next 6 months is going to be difficult for the Supreme Court. It's not going to be positive. It's what they have to do. It's their job. The Constitution requires it. But the left and the regime, the establishment that wants to stop Trump is willing to diminish our core institutions. And I'll say it again with a summary that I really like. If you go to England, you can visit the crown jewels, right? If you go to England, you can visit the king, right? That's England. You go to the parts of the world, you have other things. In America, you come to America, the crown jewel is the Constitution and the rule of law. And the fact that we have values that at the heart of it, we will be honorable towards each other under the Constitution, the rule of law. If we lose that, we none of us, I don't think we're all, immigrants and mutts and this and that. And that's America. That's us. We're not someone that comes from a bloodline. If we lose our crown jewel, and that's what they're taking on, we have a big, big problem. We have a really big problem, and it's a real threat to the future of our nation if we can't stop this madness. And when people say Trump wants revenge, I say I don't want revenge. I want to use the law and the system in the way it was intended to do, to hold people accountable and to not have it be a system of men over laws. And so that's really what's at stake. So I think Trump ultimately, I worry more that they find another way to stop the election, that they we have another COVID, we have another emergency. I pray for Trump's health and safety because, again, I distrust the government so completely that if you say, oh, no, that would never happen in America, that kind of thinking is nonsensical at this point. To say, if you haven't seen the documentaries on JFK recently that show the conduct, again, I'm not vouching for everything I read or I saw in these documentaries, but at this point, distrust then verify has got to be where you're thinking. And so I think that there's a lot to worry about, but ultimately, I'm confident that the Lord's got a plan that we can succeed, and so we got to hang on.
I certainly hope you're right. And for all those people that took those plea deals to avoid to avoid all those other charges, and they pled guilty to 1512C2. I don't know how this is going to affect to them. If nothing else, maybe we can get their record expunged. I don't know, but something has to be done for those people too.
Very quickly. One thing is, if they have sat through the jail time, you can pardon them, as you point out, and if they have, if they're in jail right now, you could reduce the sentences. But I'm for actually reparations. I think this is such an affront to the American people, and it's so fresh. They got a big pot of money for asbestos poisoning, rightly so. Corporations poisoned a bunch of people, and they had to get their, but you know what? There ought to be a big pot of money to try to make these people have a better life than they're going to have because of what they did to them. And I'm for that. I'm for thinking like that as a way to hold people accountable. If I can't get Lisa Monaco or Merrick Garland or whoever ordered the 1512, I tell people, it's like, who ordered the code red? Who ordered the 1512? That's what I want to know. If I can't get that person held accountable for misconduct, I can at least say the government should pay the people who suffered as a way to make things closer to right than wrong.
I agree with you 100%, and I hope you're successful in those efforts once all of this is settled. That we do need. I mean, if we're going to talk about reparations for Native Americans, reparations for African Americans, then why not reparations for people who were railroaded by our justice system?
Exactly. Exactly right.
Due to J6. I agree with you 100%.
Yep.
Ed, I want to thank you for being here today. It's been very, very enlightening. And as this thing progresses, we'd love to have you back sometime to provide continued analysis.
Anytime. I very much appreciate your effort to have our voices out there. And patriotfreedomproject.com, if people have a extra gift card this holiday season, we're still sending out gift cards to families and things. So I stole one of my kids' Amazon cards and sent it to Cynthia. So, if you're lying around the house, there was too many. I thought the kids had too many gift cards. I got to get rid of them. So patriotfreedomproject.com is a good place to go. So thanks very much.
Absolutely. Ed, we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All right. God bless. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Tea Party Power Hour with Mark Gillar.